Hello, listeners and fellow book lovers. Welcome to The Book Snug, a bi-weekly conversational podcast about books and the reading life. My name is Stephanie.
And I'm Julia.
We're a mother and a daughter who love reading and talking about books, the ones we adore and the ones we don't. We're delighted you're here, so grab your favorite hot drink or ice-cold beverage and settle in for another cozy, bookish chat.
Hi, Mom.
Hi, Julia.
How are you?
I'm good.
Good.
I'm enjoying this quiet week. Well, it's not that quiet between Christmas and New Year's. It's nice to have a little bit of a break. I know you don't have one. But your dad and I both have off this week. So we're enjoying the more relaxed pace.
Good. Yeah. And my job now is flexible that I could take it next year and it won't be a problem. Whereas like in jobs past, like it was a whole situationship trying to get PTO for the holidays. So it's nice that I can look forward to that for next year.
Yeah.
Do you have a highlight from the Christmas season? I know we're still kind of in the middle of it, but is there something that stands out to you as being like really nice this year?
I just enjoyed being with my family. I always do. And we got together a few days before Christmas instead of Christmas Day. And it was just nice to have a relaxed pace where you guys didn't have to be running off to visit other family members, and we could enjoy the food and our time together. So I really enjoyed that. Jay and I, my husband Jay and I, did a couple fun things throughout December that were very holiday-ish and fun.
Yeah, I have to agree. Coming over for Christmas was really nice because when we've done it on Christmas Eve before, we either do it after service and it's like really late at night, or we've done it in the morning. So then we have to a certain time that we have to break at.
Right, because everybody is involved in the worship band or whatever.
Right. So it was just really nice to have just a full day to just kind of be leisure with Christmassy.
Yeah, spending time together, eating good food, opening gifts. Yeah, I agree.
Are you drinking anything good today?
I am drinking Harney and Sons Christmas tea because it is the only tea I think I have been drinking for the last 4 weeks of my life. But I love it. I could drink it year round, but I definitely drink it around Christmas time.
Is that the one that I'm drinking? Because I didn't really look at the box. I just was more concerned with how it smells. No,
you're drinking Twining's winter tea.
Oh, okay.
Which is non-caffeinated. It has apple and appley spices. Yeah, it's a nice tea.
Okay. I mean, it smells good. I just was not paying one bit of attention to which box I pulled it from.
Anyway, we're both enjoying very Christmassy seasonal teas, which seems appropriate.
Yeah, although it's kind of warmish outside. Like it feels like it's middle of March.
It's gorgeous today, frankly. I was going to go for a walk and just didn't get my sneakers on before you got here, but
I might try to convince Ben to get us on the bike this evening.
Yeah, it is. It would be chilly on the bike, but it is nice.
Yeah. Today is a fun episode.
It absolutely is. Yeah.
And I feel like our entire year kind of builds up to this single episode. Because this is when we share what our favorite books of the year are. So, friends, listeners, if you are listening to us for the first time and want to know kind of our information or our other high-ranking books, maybe as I think I want to say that, our superlatives that we did just before this episode is where we talked about the book covers that we liked the most or the ones that made us cry. And so maybe weren't our top-ranking books. But
some of them are our worst.
Right.
Yeah, the superlatives episode kind of forced us to pick books that fit certain characters or characteristics. Like they're the most of something, the most worstest. Yes. The most surprising in a good way.
Right. The most enjoyable character. Whatever.
Yeah.
So
good and bad.
Yeah. So that's a fun episode too, that if you're looking for more of kind of what we like to read throughout the year, what we absolutely are not ever going to read ever again.
Right.
That's a good episode to go back to. Before I get ahead of myself, I realized I never said hi and welcome to everybody. So hi and welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Book Snug. It is nice to have you here, and I hope that if you've celebrated Christmas or any holidays, that you've had a really peaceful, quiet, relaxing, life-giving time, and that as you look forward to the new year, that is just full of excitement for you.
Yeah.
To begin our conversation about our favorite books of the year, let's kind of chat about our goals. So did you have any goals for 2023 with your reading?
Yeah, I've talked about them a few times here on the show. I always pick a goal through Goodreads, just a number of books I would like to read. I know, Julia, just roll your eyes and get it over with, because every time we have this conversation, you do this. Mm-hmm. I always pick a low ball goal, a goal I know I'm going to meet, because I don't want any stress about it. And I just like seeing myself reach the number and surpass it.
Sure.
And I did. I set a goal for 65 books. Currently, I have read, I think, 82 or 83 books.
Okay.
So I surpassed my goal, but I am way lower than I was last year. I read over 100 books last year.
Yeah, you did.
And that felt like a little bit too much to me. Where I am right now feels pretty good. Mm-hmm. But I read 2 books in November, which is way lower than my norm for a month.
Yeah.
And I've only read 4 books in December. So I said early on when we first started producing this show that my reading falls off in November and December. It really fell off this year for a number of reasons. Work was particularly stressful. December and the Christmas season was a little bit more difficult than usual. And I just found myself not having time to read or not really wanting to pick books up. So it's just when reading is a part of your life, the desire ebbs and flows, and the amount of books you pick up changes depending on what else is going on in your life. So I'm here to say that just because I'm a book lover and I love to read, I do have times in my life where I do very little reading. Having said all that, I met my goal. I also wanted to read more of my own books because I have a lot. And I have a tendency to ignore them and always want to pick up something new and fresh. So this year, I wanted to read 2 fiction and 1 nonfiction from my shelves every month. And I did that for the most part, except in November and December, because my reading just tanked for the most part. But I feel really good. Of the 83 books I read, 54 were from my shelf.
Okay, nice.
So I feel like I really did well with that goal.
That's a good ratio, definitely.
Yeah. I also really hit the nonfiction. So I met my nonfiction goal there. And then finally, I wanted to read The Count of Monte Cristo, and I did that early on in February.
Yeah.
Enjoyed it very much. It's one of the books that I still think about sometimes. So it was very good.
Yeah.
I didn't love it like I thought I was going to, but it definitely stuck in my head. Did you meet any of your goals, Julia? Do you even remember what they are? I know we had this conversation that you didn't write them down, so you don't really remember.
And I don't know why I didn't write them down. I think it was probably a situation of me thinking, oh, I'm going to remember these, and then clearly I didn't. But I do know that a lot of my goals have kind of stayed the same. I remember in this episode last year, that I said that I was probably going to make my reading goal the number that I hit this year was probably going to be my goal next year. It's just kind of a way to continue to get myself back into reading. So last year, I think I only read about 21-ish books. So this year, my goal was 20, and I doubled that. I read about 41 books this year.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
So thinking about next year, that pattern continuing, my goal will probably be 40. I also still have that no-buy ban in place of my books. And again, this is just to kind of help me monitor where my money is going, my impulse spending, but also kind of like you in that I have all these books that I must have been very interested in some point. Why haven't I read them yet? Now, I will say, for the most part, I've been pretty good about Target, Barnes & Noble. Verity was an unfortunate situation and all of that. But there was 2 book sales that happened this year to benefit the local library, and I came away with quite a few books from those. But that is a stipulation that I set because it benefits the library.
Right. You're not just purchasing books from a big box store or whatever.
Right. What else did I say here? I don't remember if I had a third goal, but those are the ones that I remember for sure.
Yeah. Those are the ones I remember you talking about for sure.
Yeah. Do you have any upcoming for the new year? Did we talk about those already?
We did not.
Oh, okay.
You'll be happy to hear this. I am going to up my Goodreads book number goal. I'm upping it to 70.
Oh, okay, great. Well, it's movement. It's fine.
I can still reach it pretty easily. I can still be satisfied watching the books tick off and watching the bar fill in, but there's no pressure. And that's exactly what I want from that. I do want to continue reading from my shelf, but I'm not going to do anything specifically for that. I'm also doing something I have never done before. I am picking a word of the year, and I'm going to try to make decisions based on that word. Okay. And I'm picking the word less because I'm just feeling a bit overwhelmed with stuff.
That's a good word.
Not just books, but just stuff in general in our house and so on. So a goal that I have is to go through the books I own and to be ruthless about calling out the ones I just know I'm not going to read. I own books I haven't read. They've been on my shelf for 8-10 years and I've never picked them up. So it's time. It's just time to be honest with myself and stop thinking in fantasy terms. Like, I'm this kind of reader. I'm definitely going to read this book. Some of them I've just outgrown or I've lost interest in. It's not that they're bad books. I just don't want to read them. Yeah. So that's definitely a thing I want to do, is really hone in on what I want on my shelves and pick books that I really, really want to read and get rid of the ones I own that I'm not interested in reading anymore.
It's interesting you mentioned that because I had to do that recently. I bought a book a couple of years ago, Rose Under Fire. I forget who wrote it, but it was about women in a concentration camp. And it sounds like a really, really good book. But I had to be honest with myself and say that because of my experience having walked through Dachau, I knew I was never going to be in the right headspace to read it. And so there was no point continuing to keep it on my shelf when I knew that I was continuously walking, like moving around it and pulling other things to read.
Right. And why not allow that book to get out into the bookish community and be enjoyed by someone else? Yeah. So it can fulfill its purpose.
Right. And somebody else can enjoy it. And yeah.
And I have one other goal. Now, this is still kind of nebulous. I haven't fine-tuned it yet, but I would like to purposely pick up some classics this year. I'm thinking if I could pick up 5 classics that I haven't read before, that would be a good number. And that means I'd be reading a classic about every other month.
Yeah, which is
and
doable.
Classic's going to be that's going to be a loose term.
Because you could do classic or like a modern classic.
Right, like Shirley Jackson could be a classic author I could read. So just 5, and I'm gonna let my mood choose what I want to read.
Nice.
So that's it.
One. Yeah.
5 classics, call out my owned library and read 70 books. Not very exciting. But
no, but I think it'll be interesting at the end of the year to see how well you stuck to some of those.
Yeah, because I am a book buyer. And that just means I'm going to constantly be fighting that urge to stick with my word of the year and to make sure my library definitely reflects who I am as a reader. Yeah. What about you, Julia? What are your goals for this year?
Well, I already mentioned my book number, the 40 books. And my count might not be totally accurate. It might be 41 or 42. I think I would just have to go back and double check. But that number is what I'm looking at for next year. But it's interesting. And to continue to work through my physical TBR. I feel like that's just going to be like for the next couple of years while I work through that. But it's interesting that you said about a word for the year. I do this in a very unofficial way. It's like I don't ever share it. I don't post it, but it's just something in the back of my head. And my word this year is growth. And ironically enough, my third goal is to step out of my comfort zone with my reading. So, but this is going to be an added challenge. And this goal is probably going to be another one of those couple year kind of goals. Because I know if I try to do it this year on top of everything else, I'm going to crash and burn, and it's going to be a goal of forgotten dreams. But this goal, I'm stepping out of my comfort zone, but you got me a Modern Mrs. Darcy reading journal last year for Christmas. Yeah. And within this journal, she has different genres. So fantasy or mystery or autobiography.
Lists of books.
Right.
Yes.
Or even for the seasons. And I've gone through and I've looked at this list and I've looked at books that I either that I've never heard of before and I'm interested in reading. And the only way I'm going to read them is through the library. So I'm forcing myself to get involved with my local library and to read books that are totally way out of my comfort zone or that I wouldn't have gravitated towards before as a way to kind of push myself as a reader and not fall into my comfort ruts.
Right. Not staying, you're going to get out of your lane.
Yeah. And I don't like doing this. It makes me agitated. So there might be a lot of griping and complaining that happens this year.
Well, it will help you really determine what your reading tastes are. You might find a genre or subgenre that you love that you had no idea existed. And using the library is a no stakes type of way to try new things.
Yeah, except I have 2 weeks with the book, which means I either have to finish it in that 2 weeks.
Well, you can extend your loan.
But
yeah.
There is a little bit more of a time limit on it than if I'm borrowing it from you or from
and you
my
can
own
keep
shelf.
it forever. Yeah.
So this, I'm excited about this one, but I'm also very like, stay far away. I'm not doing that kind of a goal.
Just dip your toe in every once in a while.
Maybe once or twice a month. I'll see what I can do.
It could make for very interesting book talk.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure. Okay, anything else with goals we want to talk about before we dive in?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I'm being very laid back about all of that this coming year, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Well, before we get into our drum roll favorite books of the year, do you have any honorable mentions you want to talk about?
I do. I have many. I actually had a really hard time picking my top 5 favorites because when I read a book and it ends up being a 5-star, they just all get thrown in a pile, and it's really hard for me to choose in order what I like the best. I usually have a couple at the tippy top that are like the cream of the crop, and they definitely rise, but the rest all just get mushed together. So I picked 5 books, and I had a lot of leftover 5 stars. So I'm just going to go through all of the rest of my 5-star books that I really, really enjoyed reading. Most of them I've talked about on the show before. I'm not going to give deep synopses or anything, but I'm just going to read through the list. I mentioned, it could have been in our last show, Hidden Christmas by Timothy Keller, where he takes the Christmas story and he talks about the Christian faith and living the Christian life in relationship. I mean, he's comparing the Christmas story and what is happening with the characters to what it means to walk the Christian path and claim to be a Christian. I really enjoyed it. Very short book. I listened to it as an audiobook, and Timothy Keller narrates it. And it is just really, really good. Much deeper than I was expecting. I also mentioned earlier this year How to Keep House While Drowning by Casey Davis. And she just talks about how cleaning your house and keeping your living quarters neat and tidy is not a, what's the word I want? It's not a moral activity. It has nothing to do with right or wrong. You are just taking care of the space that you live in. And she is all about making things as simple as possible. Do what you can when you can, and stop worrying about whether it's moral if your house is dirty. I just appreciated that. I would have appreciated that even more when I was a young mother with 3 very, very active, creative kids, but I still appreciated reading that. I thought it was a great book. I'm glad it's out there for people to read. The Running Grave by Robert Galbraith, who is actually J.K. Rowling. She writes a mystery series with a detective named Cormoran Strike, and he has a partner whose name is Robin. And this last book in that series was about a cult, and I just really, really enjoyed it. It was very intense. I dreamt about it. I was stressed out about it, but it was just a really good book. It's really thick, and I read it in a couple of days. And I love those two together. Like, they are some of my favorite characters to read. The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell. We did a 3 Peas in the Pod episode. Actually, it was our first 3 Peas in the Pod with my mom. Enjoyed the book thoroughly and really enjoyed the discussion. There's a book called Pony by R.J. Palacio. It is a middle grade book about a young boy who can see ghosts. And his father is kidnapped, and he goes on this quest to find his father. It's just very good, very moving, very satisfying read. And it's a little bit spooky, so I really liked it. And then the final book I want to bring to the show as an honorable mention is Sweep by Jonathan Auxier. This is another middle grade book about a young girl who was a chimney sweep in England, in London, at about the turn of the century. And it's the story of her life, and she is orphaned, but she gets a very special friend in a very odd way. And it's just their story together. And then what it's like to be a sweep in London and how she finds herself in a situation where she basically has to survive on her own. And it's good. I just really, really enjoyed it. Very sweet, very moving. A few tears might have been shed. So I highly recommend it. It would be great to read this time of year, I think. I love Jonathan Auxier as a writer. He wrote The Night Gardener, which is an actually pretty scary book that is middle grade that I like to read around Halloween. So those are my honorable mentions, all 5-star reads for me. Oh, I have 2 repeats too. And I don't usually count rereads in lists like this because if I'm rereading them, they're going to be 5 stars to begin with. Like I don't generally pick up a book I didn't love before. The first is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. That was also a 3 Ps in the Pod episode with Paige, who is going to be my daughter-in-law in a little bit. I just remember thinking when I was reading it for the second time how much I enjoyed reading that book. And I know, Julia, you did not. So go ahead and make your faces. It's absolutely okay.
It's the story. It's not the writing. It's not the author. It's just the
story. I know. And then my second reread, and this is a book I reread almost every year, is A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. It is such a lovely story, so beautifully written. What a tale of redemption. I just love it. And this time I listened to a version narrated by Hugh Grant. It's an Audible original, and it was spectacular. I loved every second of it. So those are my honorable mentions. What about you, Julia?
So I have a couple of rereads on my list for honorable mentions as well, but like rereads from like childhood. So like I knew the story, but like just wanted to read it again.
It's almost like reading for the first time. Yeah.
And when I was thinking about this honorable mentions list, after looking at the ones that I wanted to talk about as my favorite books, I kept coming back to like what books were enjoyable and pleasurable to read. And so that's the list that I came up with. And not all of them were 5 stars, or even some of them weren't even 4 stars, but I just really enjoyed the story, or I really enjoyed reading them. But the repeat. So Holes by I do this all the time. Louis Sachar. That was a reread. Ella Enchanted by Gail, Carson, Levine, which I know we've talked about that one.
Yeah.
Ruby Holler by Sharon Creech, and then A Tuck Everlasting by Natalie Babbitt were my rereads this year that I just enjoyed so much. And then my first time read-throughs that were honorable mentions, Memory Keeper's Daughter by Kim Edwards, which I talked about in the last episode.
Yeah, that actually won an award.
Yeah.
For most likely to
make me
break
cry.
your heart. Yeah.
Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater.
Very fun.
Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by, oh my gosh.
Heather Fawcett.
Thank you. I just drew a complete blank.
Yes.
And then Nevermoor, Morrigan Crow, The Trials of Morrigan Crow by Jessica Townsend. And then Ready Player One by Ernest Kline.
Yeah, that's a fun book too.
Yeah. So these were books that like I just enjoyed reading and didn't rank them very high, but just enjoyed them immensely.
Yeah. Good books.
And Tuck Everlasting, I just had the dumbest little smile on my face the entire time reading it. It just,
made you happy.
Yes.
There's a lot to be said for that.
Yes. Okay. Now, let's jump into the meat of this episode.
Okay. These are the 5-star cream of the crop books of 2023.
Yay. Well, why don't you kick us off, Mom? Where are you starting?
Well, you already mentioned my first pick.
I guess maybe we should say that these are in no particular order.
They are not. They aren't. I can't do it. I can't. I cannot organize these in any kind of 5-to-1 order. So my first book is Emily Wilde's Encyclopaedia of Faeries by Heather Fawcett. I listened to this. It's narrated by Elle Potter and Michael Dodds. This makes a list for just pure escapism and entertainment. This was just such a fun book. I loved the main characters. I loved the side characters. The setting was so real for me. I could easily imagine everything she described. It was just so much fun. And it is about a woman who lives in an England at the turn of the century.
Yeah.
I mean, I think she's from Cambridge.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a feel of real world to this. But it is a world that absolutely believes in fairies, knows they exist, and she is an expert on them. She teaches about them, and she is putting an encyclopedia together, and she travels to a country and a town it's like a Scandinavian country, to find a particular variety of fairy. She is an interesting character because I don't know that she's on the spectrum, but she does not have good social skills. Nope. She is very focused on her work, and she misses a lot of social cues. So she ends up really irritating the community that she needs to help her do what she wants to do. And she has a coworker named Wendell Bamblebee, who is suave and
opposite.
Popular and famous. And he shows up and ends up becoming her partner to find these fairies. And a lot of other things happen too. But I loved the relationship between the two of them. There's a lot of fun banter. She's completely oblivious to the fact that Wendell likes her a lot.
Madly in love with her.
Right. And he is able to smooth over all of the problems she's created with the community, the little village. I loved it. I loved every bit of it. It's a beautiful book to read in the wintertime. And the next in the series is coming out January 16th. And I already pre-ordered the audiobook.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm so excited.
I'm so looking forward to it because I just know it will be a delightful listen. I've read some of the early reviews and people are saying it's even better than the first book. So, oh man, I hope so. I hope so. But I loved this book. It is not world changing. It is not going to make me be a deep thinker or a philosopher, but it is just so much fun. I love it.
Yeah. I don't know why it took me a year to read it, but it was, I second everything you said.
Okay, Julia, what's your first favorite book of 2023?
I have to go with The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell.
Yes.
And this one, it just seems like it keeps bubbling up in conversation over our episodes. And this is such an interesting book for me because in my first initial read through, I missed a lot of some of the things that then you and Nana picked up in our conversation. So it was like I was reading the book for a second time. And I think that really added in my enjoyment of it. But it also revealed Maggie O'Farrell's actual craft as a writer, of how she puts words together and layers the story so that by the end, like, it doesn't feel like you've read a book so much as you've like watched a movie or you've like been with a friend.
Experience.
Right.
Yeah. Experienced it.
Felt very real. This is definitely probably much more of a, I don't want to say mature story, but I don't think I generally read books with this kind of
it's a literary historical fiction.
Yeah. I like not as heavy-handed real.
Yeah.
I don't tend to read things like that. But this was a prime example of, much like my goal for the new year, of the stories that I miss by boxing myself in.
Yes.
This, I can give a synopsis, but I don't know if I would need to.
We can just link the show.
Yeah.
I mean, you could talk about who the book is about.
Okay. So if you are a first-time listener and this is the first time you're hearing me talk about this book, one, I recommend that you check out our episode that we've linked below where we talk about this in detail. But truthfully, the Marriage Portrait is based off of a portrait of Lucrezia de Medici. Rather, it's based off of a poem by Longfellow.
I forget, but yeah, it is based on a poem.
It's based on a poem about a portrait of Lucrezia de Medici that was found, I think is what it was. And Lucrezia de Medici, there's not much known about her other than that she married Alfonso de Medici and she died within the first year or so of their marriage.
She was 16 when she died.
Yeah. And so this is Maggie O'Farrell's attempt at creating the life of this woman who very little is about.
There's also a rumor that he killed her.
Yes.
It's unsubstantiated, but it is a rumor that has been passed down through the ages of history. Yeah. And she addresses that in the book.
So I really enjoyed this. I was not anticipating the historical connections to some of my own previous knowledge in the book, or some of the places mentioned in the book, or places that I've been in Italy. Like, it was just a really cool reading experience. And the more that I think about this book, the more it just kind of feels like one of those comfort books that I go back to on my bookshelf just to like touch the spine. Like, that's just a weird way to describe it.
Right.
But like, do you know what I mean?
I do.
Where you just want to like, it's like, I don't know how else to describe it other than that.
It helps you recall the experience of reading.
But it's just like, I love you. You're over there. I'm not sure I'm diving in anytime soon again, but I'm just coming to say hello. I mean, that's how I would describe that. So this one definitely kind of shimmers up to the surface.
Yeah, I agree. It was a great read, a great experience discussing it on the show. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Good pick, Nana. Okay. What's your second one?
My second favorite. The next book I want to talk about is Endurance, Shackleton's Incredible Voyage by Alfred Lansing. I also listened to this, and this was narrated by Simon Preble. It's a true story of a grueling 2-year survival experience by Ernest Shackleton, who was the head of this expedition, and his 27 men who were with him. Endurance comes from the name of the boat that they traveled on to Antarctica. The boat got stuck in ice and sunk, and they took 2 years trying to get back to a place where they could actually catch a boat and head home. It was an incredible listening experience. The writing was superb. This was written, I think, in the 1950s, and it was interspersed with eyewitness accounts and journal entries from the men who endured this experience. Every time I think about it, I just cannot believe that they made it for 2 years in Antarctica. Most of the time they were wet. They were always cold. They were hungry. I mean, it's an amazing story. Yeah. And I think what I find the most fascinating is that they cooperated, they communicated with each other. There was a camaraderie, and there was a great deal of respect for Ernest Shackleton. So you didn't have people who were constantly questioning his decisions. People just did what he asked them to do. And I was impressed by that, and I'm pretty sure that's what saved their lives. Yeah. So great book. I really, really, really enjoyed it. Very memorable. It's another book I think about a lot.
Okay, my second book is Other Birds by Sarah Addison Allen.
Yeah, love this too.
And again, this goes the avenue of I would have missed this if it wasn't for your recommendation. So I guess I'm learning a lot about what I need to open my eyes up to.
Or just listening to your mom.
Well, that too. But that lesson I learned a very, very long time ago. Whether I do it in that moment or not is yet to be learned. But listen to your mother. That's yes. Learned, heard. I was not anticipating liking this book as much as I did. And I think I talked about in the last episode too, where it's like when somebody gives me a recommendation, then suddenly I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to make sure I like this as much. What happens if I don't? So this was just a really pleasant surprise at how wonderful it actually was. And it's a wholesome story. Like, there's not really anything that's grotesque that happens. And I don't mean grotesque as in like gross, but there's nothing evil or harsh or traumatic really that happens. It's just a really gentle story of personal growth, of found family, of magic. And you finish the book with the dopiest smile on your face, and your heart just feels warm and fuzzy. And
right.
It's just a really good, tender ending to the book as well.
Yeah. It's one of those books where you don't care that it isn't high literature. No. You don't care that the writing is not knocking your socks off, although the writing is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with it. Because it's just such a joy to experience. There's a little bit of like background trauma. Nothing that's on the page happening in front of you. But some of the people in their childhoods experience some things. Yeah.
I was also... this was also a book where I would read things and then realize like 5 pages later, oh, that was a twist. Like there's subtle enough twists in this book that it kept me hooked the whole time.
Yeah.
And things were revealed so quietly that like if you weren't paying attention, you would 100% have missed it.
You weren't going to get whiplash from the twists and turns.
No.
Yeah.
No. But it was also done in such a way that there's definitely hints to everything leading up to it. You just aren't paying attention to any of that.
Mm-hmm.
The writing too, maybe I feel this way because it takes place in North Carolina, which is a place that we frequent.
Mm-hmm.
But the writing to me felt it felt like midsummer, and I don't know how else to explain that other than just like anticipatory, warm, like there were just
lights,
brimming with
sparkly.
Yeah. Fabulous story.
I agree. I love this. I just had so many good books that didn't even make my honorable mention, but I really enjoyed reading this.
Mm-hmm.
It was a pleasure.
Mm-hmm. Number 3, Mom.
Okay. I'm going to take a left turn from Other Birds, and we are going to talk about a nonfiction book that I absolutely loved. I also think about this book still a lot. And if I had to choose a book of the year, this would probably be my book. This is Gentle and Lowly by Dane Ortland. I read this. I did not listen to this. And I actually treated it as like a devotional where I just read one chapter and worked through some of the verses. Like I only read a chapter at a time, and I spent time in that chapter just thinking about what the author was saying. Dane Ortland takes the passage in Matthew. It's Matthew 11, 28 and 29. And he might have used 32, but I can't quite remember. And he does the Puritan practice of taking small groups of verses and just picking them apart and finding every possible thing that you can within that verse. So he did that in this book. The verses in Matthew are the ones that are come to me, all who are
come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest.
Thank you. My brain just went totally
that was a
blank.
burst of energy. I'm glad my brain worked.
For I am gentle and lowly in spirit. That whole thing.
Okay.
Yeah, that was awful. The whole book talks about the fathomless love that Jesus has for us. And then because of it being Jesus, God also has that love for us. And it really breaks down the barriers of believing that you're not good enough for the love of God, that you have to constantly be doing things to make you more acceptable, or that God doesn't really love you that much, that because we're sinners, because we're unacceptable, he doesn't really love us. This book takes care of all of that, addresses every possible issue that you can have with that. And you end up feeling the love of Christ when you're finished. And I've said this a couple of times. If you don't know who Jesus is and you've never met him, this is a great book to be introduced to the real character of Jesus and of God. And I loved it. And I've been a Christian for a long time. I don't consider myself a new Christian. And I still found so many things in this book to ponder and really, really take to heart.
It sounds like it was a very meditative experience.
It is. It's a deep book. You're not going to read it quickly. You're going to want to take your time and really think through the concepts that Dane Ortland is presenting. But it's so worth it. It is just so worth it. Are you going to continue in this serious vein, or are we going to do something different with your book number 3?
I'm stepping away from the serious conversations for a second.
Okay.
So my book number 3, I might have talked about maybe once or twice, and that's The Secret History of Witches by Louisa Morrigan.
Yeah. I just feel like with all these books, we've talked about them numerous times. None of these are surprises, I don't think.
Well, and also, I've only read 40 books. That's a very, very small pool of books to pull from for doing a podcast. in all honesty.
Right.
Your 100 books last year kind of spread things out a little bit more.
Yeah.
But what sticks with me the most about this book is just the saga that it created with looking at the mothers and their daughters throughout this story and what it means to pass things down and the cultural impacts that can have on those traditional identities, and how there's some methodology for passing things down that is more effective than others. So for example, we always do it this way. This is how you do it. Don't ask questions, versus let me explain it to you, versus I think this is stupid and I'm not sharing it with my kids. Like that kind of looking at how that impacts those cultural and traditional identities it was a very interesting thing for me to look at. It hadn't ever really been something I think I'd considered to that degree. But even though this book talks about natural witchcraft, and that's not something I partake in, being able to see how mothers and or families were concerned about their young children being impacted by the culture against these identities that they were trying to foster just made me think a lot about, like, as a Christian, what does it mean for me to hold to my beliefs versus interact with the world around me? And where's the blur between all of that, and how to be more mindful of that?
And when you have kids, how do you help them navigate that?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. There's also some themes in this book, too, that examines what it means to make difficult decisions for the sake of those identities. And how do you navigate that? But then also, how do you reconcile that in the years afterwards? I truly devoured this book. I think I read it in a day and a half, maybe 2 days.
Wow.
It was nonstop. It pulled me right in. And I have no other way to describe it than this, and it's going to sound so weird. But the way that this book continues to sit in my head, it's like a psalm or like a prayer or like an ancient cry into the wind. Like I don't know how else to say that other than like it's like this call from generations past to like listen, to listen to those who came before, but then also to be mindful of those that come later.
Yeah.
It sounds so like
woo-woo.
Yeah.
It does sound a little woo-woo, but that's okay.
It doesn't make sense what I'm saying. It feels like it's that kind of story where it's not just a moment in time that you're looking at.
Yeah.
So
generational stories like that often have that impact. I cannot talk today. My words they're getting all stuck back there in the back of my throat.
Mine are getting stuck up here and I'm adding extra letters and things. Okay. Book number 4, Mom.
Book number 4. We are going to talk about unlikely animals once again.
That's another one I haven't heard of before.
Yeah, right. I talk about this one a lot. It showed up in the show, our last episode, because it is a funny book. And I laughed many, many times. There are a couple of scenes in this book that are just absolutely hilarious. But anyway, this is Unlikely Animals by Annie Hartnett. I listened to this as well. So audiobooks really did well this year for me. The book is narrated by Mark Bramhall and Kirby Hayborn. It is a tragic comedy. So even though it's funny, it's dealing with really heavy topics like infidelity, like brain disease or dementia, drug abuse. There's a little bit of kidnapping in here.
Just a little bit, just sprinkling of kidnapping.
Plus you have a young girl who just cannot figure out who she is or what she wants to do with herself. So the story revolves around a family that is just really, really struggling. The father has had an affair and the mother wants to leave, but the father also has some kind of brain disease or disorder going on. She doesn't want to leave him because he can't take care of himself. He's not trustworthy to do what he needs to do. So she is still involved in the family, although there is quite a rift in their relationship. The son is recovering from an opioid addiction, and the daughter is the main character in this story, and she is the one who just doesn't know what she wants to do with herself. And she's disappointed her family because they thought she was going to med school and she never showed up to med school. So that's how this starts. But there's a whole community story going on, and the narrators of the story are very unique. I don't want to give that away. the dad who has the brain cancer or whatever. They don't really know. It's not really discussed. He hallucinates. So he sees animals in the strangest places. He also sees ghosts, and he is he's fixated on one thing, and it's kind of driving everybody crazy. But he's the only one who's doing what needs to be done. So anyway, that's kind of an odd description. It's a weird book, but it's so very, very, very good. I can't stress enough how much I enjoyed this. The listening experience probably made it even better, but I'm sure it would be fine to read as a book as well. I like Annie Hartnett anyway. She wrote another book called Rabbit Cake that I also listened to and really, really enjoyed. She deals a lot with grief in her writing. Yes. A lot of grief, but she handles it very lightly and very hopefully. This is not a book I would recommend to everyone, but there is a certain type of person who will just absolutely love this.
In my own reading, it just feels like it might be too much going on for me to keep track of.
There is a lot. I mean, there's a lot going on in this book.
But as my comments have been so far proven, that maybe I need to step out of my comfort zone and give it a shot.
Well, I recommend that you do that, but
well, my plate might be a little
I'm biased. Tell us about your number 4 book, Julia.
So my number 4, it's actually a twofer. These are 2 nonfiction stories that I read earlier this year that have had a significant impact on my understanding of my internal stereotypes and biases. Yeah. That's how I think I want to say that. So the first one is Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. And his story, he is writing to his son. So the book takes on the form of like a letter, and he's writing to his son about his experiences being a young Black boy growing up, and then what it meant to go to college, and then his experiences as an adult with a college roommate who then was killed by police. So laying all of these experiences out for his son, and allowing his son to be to hear this history and to process it. And I found that book to be very poetic in his writing, but also very Ta-Nehisi doesn't shy away from honesty. And so things are very clear as to what his experiences were. And it just made me very reflective of what my experience is as a white woman, but also in how I interact with those who maybe live in different socioeconomic places than I do. So it caused a lot of self-reflection, what it means to have friends who are killed by police, or the kind of trauma that might carry. And then the second book, I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness by Austin Channing Brown. This takes a look at Christianity in a small way. And Austin Channing Brown, she's looking at her experience being a Black woman, but then also looking at how Christianity has been crafted to some degree for white Christians and what it means for Christianity to be for all people. And through these books, I don't want to get too preachy, but through these books, what really came out of it was a reflection of how do I interact with those who have experiences that I can never have? What does it mean for me to be a white Christian when there are others who are Christians but have different racial or cultural backgrounds that might impact that as well? So these books just brought a lot of personal and self-reflection to me this year that have persisted throughout the year.
Yeah, sounds like they're very thoughtful books.
Mm-hmm. A friend of mine who doesn't read books at all, I had her over a little bit before Christmas, and she saw my shelves of books, and she was like, all right, tell me your favorites. And I was pulling some out. And she's like, well, I don't do fiction, so what else? And so I showed her these 2 books, and I was talking about them, and she's like, all right, I'm going to read these. So they're really powerful. And I've been in a place recently where I am trying to listen to people, and I'm trying to listen about things that I have no personal experience with, so that I can be a little bit more gracious and loving. And I found these books to be very informative in that space. Mm-hmm. Okay, we've made it. Book number 5, Mom. Where are you taking us with this one?
I'm taking us to Troy.
Oh.
With Stephen Fry.
Oh, okay.
This book I also listened to, and it's narrated by Stephen Fry. He has done it's not really a series, it's just a whole group of books based on Greek myth. He did Mythos, which was all the gods and goddesses. Then he did Heroes, which focused on the biggies like Heracles and Perseus and Jason and the Argonauts. Okay.
Sure.
So this is the third book called Troy. It's telling the stories of the Iliad in Stephen Fry's signature witty type of writing style. And because he reads the book, he does all of the reading, all of the emphasis, and all of the wit and humor perfectly because it's his own writing. I love the story of the Battle of Troy. It starts even before Helen is taken by Paris back to Troy, and then it goes through the whole getting everybody ginned up for the battle and the whole battle. So I just really enjoyed it. I don't know how else to say it. It was a pleasure. I listened to this while I was taking walks, and it just made the time fly by. I love Stephen Fry's storytelling. It's just every book is top notch. So this one just automatically had to make the top 5 of 2023. He is coming out with another one, and it's going to be the Odyssey, and I cannot wait. Even though I do not like Odysseus at all. I think he's sneaky and a liar, and I just don't like him.
Well, maybe I should read that version first. I have a legit copy of the Iliad and the Odyssey, and it's a little daunting. So maybe I'll read his version first and then. This
is going to be maybe an unusual opinion, but I think that the Iliad and the Odyssey should be listened to. Oh. They are epic poems. They were usually spoken when they were told. And I just feel like you get a better grasp of what's going on.
I think that's valid too, because that would have been an oral tradition time period. So I hadn't thought about that before, but you're right.
Yeah.
Either way, I think reading Stephen Fry's Odyssey is going to be a better first dipper for me than listening to it or even reading.
Oh, absolutely. So. I would highly recommend, if you want an idea of what's going on in those Homer epics, listening to Troy. And when the Odyssey comes out, I don't know what he's going to call it, if he's going to call it the Odyssey or something else.
Sure.
That would be the way to go, because they're so enjoyable and entertaining. Okay, Julia, tell us about the very last book that we're going to talk about today.
I should say up front that this book probably goes the way of the recency effect, meaning I literally just finished it.
Yeah, but it's a good one.
Yeah. This final one is The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield.
Love this one too.
Yes. This one it's a Gothic story. There's no other way to say that. But I think from the very beginning I was doomed, because it's a book about books, a book about storytelling, and there's Jane Eyre. Yes. I was doomed. I was doomed. But I think this is the first time that I'm actually truly talking about it on the show. So I'll just give a little rundown. Margaret Lee, who is our protagonist, the book is told from her perspective, runs a bookstore with her father, and gets a letter in the mail from a Vida Winter, who is a renowned author, like world famous author. And Vida is asking Margaret to write her biography. And so Margaret goes, and there's this history that Vida has been asked a number of times from other people to write, her biography, and she's just given them lie after lie after lie. And so Margaret is unsure what she's getting into. And she finds out that Vida is actually unwell, and this is actually legitimately the true story. And it begins to unfold a story of generational trauma and, so much. There's twins, so there's an examination of twins and the psychology of twins too, even really of twin language and twin behavior. There is a possible ghost. There's a house on fire. There's quite a bit of death that happens.
Yeah.
But it's told like Frankenstein or like The Historian, where it's a story inside of a story and the people are telling stories within that. Or
so it's definitely a framed narrative.
Right. It's an inception. Definitely. It was fabulous. It was so easy to get into and so easy to read. There were many times throughout the book where I had significant questions about what was happening, and I could just feel Diane Setterfield giving me that, I don't know, look. Like she was just not going to come right out and say anything. Yeah. I deeply enjoyed this. There is one point I want to mention, and I guess we're about to hit another serious point. She mentioned, well, Margaret Lee, I don't think it's a spoiler by saying this, but she was a twin, but her sister didn't make it through birth. And so this is a theme that happens throughout the book. And she calls herself an amputee, this idea of feeling that a part of her is missing. This theme of twins happens a lot throughout the book. But I started this book in November and probably should have finished it in November because December was a really, really hard month for me this year. This time last year, I was dealing with a very, very sick kitty. And I don't know if I've said this on the podcast. I'm going to try not to get emotional, but I had a miscarriage last year. It was my first pregnancy and the due date was Christmas Eve. Mm-hmm. So it was a very rough December for me. And after I finished reading the 13th tale, I realized that the way that Diane Setterfield talks about grief, it's apparent that she's dealt with very intimate grief because this idea of an amputee, of missing a part of yourself, I know that feeling.
Right. It resonates with you.
Yeah. And so there was a lot of tears that were shed in this book. I wasn't expecting to cry at the end, even when I picked up the book. Like, it didn't seem like a book I was going to cry at. Yeah. And I got to the end of the book and I'm sobbing and I can't see to turn the page. And I was not expecting that. I was not expecting that level of emotional connection. But honestly, I don't think I was anticipating being at that emotional point to have read this book. So I think in hindsight, I would have read it at another time. All of that is to say that the writing in the 13th tale is really good. It's a really good story. It ties up really, really nicely at the end. And there's a twist in the story too, that I don't know how I feel about the implication that's made. Either way, this was a good book to kind of end my year on.
Yeah, it's a great book. Aside. I read it several years ago, so I'm probably missing some of the nuances and the details of the story, but I remember really, really enjoying it. So much so that I went on to read another of her books and really enjoyed that as well. Well, I guess we're closing out 2023, aren't we?
Yeah, we are.
It was a good reading year. I feel like I had a really good experience with books this year. Yeah. I'm looking forward to 2024.
Yeah. So I already have my January books pooled and ready to go.
Yeah.
So
like I said, I hardly did any reading in November and December, and I'm ready to jump back in and really get started. Really looking forward to Emily Wilde's Map of the Other Lands, I think it's called. I can't wait for that. And in our next episode, we are going to be talking about new releases coming out in the first half of 2024.
I forgot that was the next
There are so many good ones. Yeah. I cannot wait to talk about them.
I need to get into that.
It's going to be hard to narrow down so that we can fit them all in an hour.
Yeah, we might have to say picked 5.
Yeah, because I'm going to have to read. We're going to have to read synopses because I haven't read the book yet, so I can't really say whether it's good or bad. Yeah. But a lot of authors that I really enjoy reading have books coming out. There's some good fantasy books coming out, some good historical fiction. Just, I can't wait. Yeah. So join us if you're interested in hearing some of the books that are coming up that sound really, really good. Please join us in the next chapter. And as always, if you are enjoying the show and you haven't done so already and you would like to, please rate us and review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. All that does is it makes us more visible to people who would be interested in the podcast, and we will have more people joining our little listening group. So if you do that, we would appreciate it. We do appreciate everyone who's already taken the time to do that. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us today. We are so glad that you're here, and we hope you come back and join us in the Book Snug again in the next chapter.
Bye, friends. We'd love for you to continue today's conversation with us at the BookSnug_podcast on Instagram and at the BookSnug podcast on Facebook. All of our episodes can be found wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as at our website, thebooksnugpodcast.buzzsprout.com, where show notes for every episode can be found. We'd love to hear from you. Email us at thebooksnugpodcast@gmail.com.
As C.S. Lewis, one of our favorite authors, famously said, "You can never have a cup of tea large enough or a book long enough to suit me." And we wholeheartedly agree.